So today on March 19th, 2024 at Punjabi University Patiala, we are continuing to talk to Professor Mukunda, who is visiting this university. He had come for a workshop on quantum physics and then he is interacting with faculty and students here. Professor Mukunda, what I want to start with is that if you look at 20th century, the early part of it, and we see that we had, C.V. Raman, we had Bose, we had many people who became famous later like Hargobind Khurana, Abdul Salam, but they all got their education in India in the university system under the colonial rule, and they became very well-known scientists in their own right. So, after 1947, we moved on with our education system. We set up so many institutions and things developed in a very big way. But somehow, many people sometimes say that that kind of a much bigger impact in the world of science should have come because we were masters of our own nation and so on. And why did not we have such stalwart names coming out of this country in the period from in 1950s, 60s, 70s, or maybe we were doing other things. So how do you see this?
It's a very complicated question. The first thing to acknowledge is that the state of human societies in different countries have changed enormously over a 100-year period, 70, 80, 100-year period. The population sizes have also grown enormously, and in comparison to the developed countries of the West and Japan, the investments in the needs for what kind of investment do you need to make to achieve first class, first grade quality science education, the needs are enormous, much more intensive in terms of resources now than 100 years ago. In a simplified sense, one can say physics as a discipline, let us talk about physics, the names you mentioned were all in physics. Physics itself was a simpler subject. In the last 80, 100 years, it has expanded beyond imagination. And for a country to be able to give opportunities for its young people to work in that field at the frontiers, much more support, much more public investment in institutions and laboratories would have been needed. That has obviously not happened in India. The period when Bose, Saha and Raman did their greatest work, it was still possible for individual physicists, almost isolated from others, to do these achievements. I remember there is a famous saying from Arnold Sommerfeld, who visited India in 1928 to see Raman's laboratory. He wrote, "It will not be long before our Indian brothers will join the ranks of the world in scientific productivity," and so on. It could not happen. Of course, the war came in between, political upheaval and so on. I just want to compare this with what had happened in Japan. In the late 19th century, there was a tremendous social transformation in Japan. I do not know the details, I am not a historian, but it is called the Meiji period. And Japanese society, as a policy, they tried to go in the Western direction in education, technology and so on. If you look at Japan during the 20th century, how many Nobel Prizes have Japanese persons got in literature, in physics, chemistry? It is of the order of 25 to 30 Nobel Prizes, of that order. No other Asian country has reached that level. India still has one for work done in India. The other Indian Nobel Prize winners in science have got the prize for work done outside. It is Chandrasekhar, I would count Abdul Salam in that, and Hargobind Khurana, Venki Ramakrishnan more recently. Amartya Sen, I do not know, much of his work was done in India, then in the West.
But it is a different domain.
It is a different domain. So, it seems clear the investment in higher education, in facilities, modernization in a broad sense, in India never reached the level that Japan achieved in the late 19th century. That foundation laid in Japan was crucial for its success during the
So what I see from your remarks is that it is the keeping the institutional framework at pace with the way world was moving, and very interesting things you mentioned, that things became more institutional. So for an individual to excel sitting at home or in a small laboratory and so on, that era maybe of science ended.
That is a sociological change.
Sociological
which we have to
changes.
accept,
Yeah. And you have been involved with the institutions in many different ways, whether it is Department of Science and Technology or the academies of science and so on. So particularly from the aspect of, because academies do worry about how science is developing, how science education is developing. So was this aspect noticed by academies, or and were an initiative taken in the later years in India?
I'll come to that after making one preliminary statement. As far as I know, in every developed Western country, many laboratories requiring very sophisticated equipment and enormous financial support have been built. However, the intellectual sources, the powerhouses of ideas and work remain the universities of those countries. As far as I know, in none of the countries like Canada, USA, UK, France, Germany, none of them have allowed their universities to slide back in any way in favor of centralized facilities, laboratories devoted exclusively to research. That has not happened. The greatest discoveries, apart from CERN, which is an exception, the greatest Nobel Prize quality work has always originated in a university setting, even up to now. Every one of the Nobel Prizes we celebrate every year, pretty much every one of them, it is within a university framework. That unfortunately is not true in India. As a country, we have let our university system down. That is the greatest drawback for us, which I think one must keep in mind. One has to acknowledge, especially as you know, state universities suffer the most. Federal, centrally supported universities are in a somewhat better shape. But now I come to the efforts of the academies.
Since you raised a very interesting point, so like if you look at the Indian universities, so there were very few universities before independence.
Yes.
And then a large number of universities were set up along with many other institutions. Then IITs were set up and so on. So where do you think this kind of started, this decline or lack of support for the universities? Right in the policies in the beginning, or do you think it happened somewhere on the way?
I think that overall there may be financial constraints on how much the country can afford for higher education and institutions of excellence. Overall, I would say, given the constraints, the centrally funded institutions have done well, reasonably well, given the overall capacities of the country. It is the state supported institutions, because of local reasons, because of political reasons, and overall lack of resources, that have gone way down where they should have been. Now, if I continue and
we can now come to the other.
The Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore was set up by Professor C.V. Raman in 1934. The president of the academy is chosen once in 3 years, and the president for the years 1992, 93, 94 was one Professor Roddam Narasimha, a very well-known aeronautical engineer of the country. So in middle of 1994, he and the council of the academy set up a panel to produce a report on the state of science education in Indian universities. Have a look at that situation as it is, see what you think are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and in what ways can the academy help in the process of science education at a national level, both for students and for teachers. So, that was the science education panel of Indian Academy of Sciences, which he set up in June, July 1994. And I was asked to head that panel. We had a very distinguished set of members. We had many discussions and meetings. We produced a report, we submitted it to the Academy in December 1994. Now, what I want to stress is, apart from recalling all the usual complaints and unhappiness with the university system at that time, we had a large number of recommendations for what the academy itself could do. Many of those were put into action given the resources of the Indian Academy of Sciences, and I will just mention them very briefly. They started around 1998. The most prominent program was All India Summer Research Fellowship Program. This was for students at the undergraduate and master's level from all over the country to interact with selected mentors for 2 months at a time, and similarly for teachers. So, that has been a very successful program. This started, as I say, around 1998 or so, and at its peak, I remember in the early 2000s, we used to get about 25,000 applications every year.
Very large number.
Yeah.
And how many?
And we were at the peak we were offering about 2,000 fellowships per year.
It's a good number to.
Of course, they were not all utilized. The utilization rate might have been at that point 1,800 per year or something, but other remarkable figures which I recall, at that time I was very closely involved with it, something like about 200 institutions in the country, universities, national labs, CSIR labs, medical institutions, about 200 institutions in the country helped the academy by accepting the students and teachers selected for mentoring. So, that was a really massive involvement. I do not know the numbers now, they might have come down a little bit, because what happened is many research level institutions in the country, laboratories like the CSIR and others, after a while they started similar summer programs of their own. So, those selected through the academy, the placement became difficult. So, the numbers have gone down. Anyway, that was the first and very successful program. I believe it is still running.
Yeah, I think it's running. I mean, okay. I got an email from the academy asking me to mentor someone just few days ago.
Yeah. The scale today I do not know, but what I gave you was the peak scale at one point. Then the academy panel report suggested we should have refresher courses for college and university teachers. The idea was not to teach them the latest research results, but help them to teach better in the classroom. That was the stated aim. And so, the idea was to have 2-week duration refresher courses exclusively for teachers, and each course, 2-week course, would handle maybe 4 or 5 or 6 themes, topics. Say typically in physics, theoretical physics, you would select 4 or 5 sort of interrelated things which are important to be taught well at the college and university level. That I think is also going on. I think it is still running, and that number per year was of the order of 30, 35, because there you need institutions with facilities to take care of about 25, 30 participants, teacher participants. So, that was the one. The next one is short duration lecture programs, 2 days, 3 days. These were called lecture workshops. They were intended for both student and teacher participation. In those gatherings, in the lectures given there, the idea was to try to reach current research level themes. That has also been going on. I believe at one point the number of lecture workshops per year, it was reaching something like 60, 70, 80, something like that.
You know, we are doing one such workshop in the first week of April over here, funded by the academy.
I am very happy to hear that is also continuing. So this, as I said, all these things started approximately 1998, 1999, a few years after the panel report. Professor N. Kumar was the president at in that phase. A few years later, because of the success of these three streams of activity, the other two national science academies, the INSA in Delhi and National Academy in Allahabad, they expressed a desire to join hands with the Indian Academy of Sciences and become joint sponsors of all these science education programs. So that has been going on since 2007. So it is roughly 8-9 years Indian Academy by itself and then all three together. Once it became all three academies support, the prestige associated with it went up very highly, and it has, I believe all three academies are still involved, and the running of the programs has been the responsibility of the academy in Bangalore, but they all are listed as jointly sponsored, supported by all three academies. So I believe that is still.
And this Journal of Science Education Resonance, that also was part of recommendations, or that was an independent?
No, that was part of the recommendations of the Science Education Panel of 1994, and so the moment that the Academy Council accepted the report, they turned around to me and said, you create this journal. And so there is a connection to Patiala. We were told the year 1995 was given as 1 year to plan and prepare the structure of the journal Resonance and to get going. And the first issue was planned for January 1996. That year the Indian National Science Congress was held in Patiala under the presidentship of Dr. U.R. Rao, who was the ISRO chairman. And so I remember coming here to Patiala in the bitter cold of January 1996 to formally release the first issue of Resonance.
So it is
now 28 years old.
And that's a very interesting connection with this university, that the Resonance first issue was released here.
Yes.
So I think after that, this is your second visit.
After that, this is my next visit. That was a 2.5-hour visit. This is a 5-day visit.
So how long then did you remain associated with the Resonance? You were the founder editor. So
that itself is a very nice story. It has been printed in Resonance when they celebrated 25 years of Resonance. I was the founding editor for 5 years, 1996, 7, 8, 9, 2000. Then my successor was Professor V. Rajaraman, and so on. And so I continued to be associated with Resonance till about 2017 or 18 on the editorial board. After that, I have stepped down.
So there was another very important program of Department of Science and Technology, the Kishore Vigyanik Protsahan Yojana, KVPY. And you were associated with the setting up that program. And I thought idea was to kind of find and nurture talent in science at a younger age, and then help them become scientists and so on. So do you want to tell us about that initiative and how it happened? And
I can tell you how it happened, but I must end by saying how it stopped.
Well, you should maybe, That's
I don't know too much about the latter part. Anyway, the idea came from the DST in late 1998 or late 98, early 1999. There was a meeting held at DST in Delhi. At that time, the secretary DST was Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, a very well-known experimental nuclear physicist. So I was part of that meeting, and others also were there. and the discussion led to, the idea came from the DST. However, they felt that a formal proposal should be made to DST to have this fellowship program to select brightest students from the 10th standard onward, those who wish to continue in science at the undergraduate level. So, this was a program of fellowships for students at the upper end of school, then undergraduate, masters, and in principle up to the completion of a PhD. Of course, the numbers would go down. So, this proposal was made by the Indian Institute of Science at the request of Department of Science and Technology, and so we went back to Bangalore and we made a committee. Professor Govardhan Mehta was the director. He supported it, the idea very strongly, and we put up the proposal to DST. It was accepted, and the program started in 1999. And so, it has been an all India program from the very beginning, and an elaborate framework or apparatus was created to receive applications from students, to have a examination at some point, test, interviews in very many cities in the country, and so on. But as time went on, it became a little bit unwieldy. Some modifications were made, as far as I know. Many faculty of IISc and other institutions also helped in the running of the program. The Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education was involved. It was going well. Modifications were made for the medical stream, for engineering, and so on. I have not been in touch with that program in the later years. All I know is that there was a problem with the use of Indian languages. Should the examination papers, should that, it was an objective type test. On the basis of the scores, students would be called for interview and so on. Should it be not in other Indian languages in addition to English? And I do not know the details, but as a result of a High Court judgment about a year ago or so, the whole program has been shut down. In the later part of KVPY, while it was running well, DST came up with the Inspire fellowship program. And so, there was I am not sure whether DST tried to make KVPY a part of Inspire or not, but anyway, in the meantime, this legal problem appeared. Now, there is no KVPY. So, it lasted for about 22 years. And
it was a very interesting program, particularly because of the interview component.
Yeah,
I mean, I have been involved with conducting the KVPY interviews for at least 7 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really, you know, very interesting talent came, very unusual, unusually gifted students came and appeared in these interviews.
Yeah.
My last part of the discussion I want to ask you, because in past, if you see about 20 years, a lot of new set of institutions have come up in the country. I mean, we had this idea of Indian Institutes of Science Education and Research.
Yes.
7 of them have come up.
Yes.
Then Government of India in a major way increased the number of central universities.
Yes.
So 30 new central universities were created.
Yeah.
And then 16 new IITs.
Yeah.
So a major expansion in the IIT framework, where they say that every state in principle should have an IIT. How do you see that these developments, and do you think this will really push the agenda of doing high quality science in the country and so on? How do you view these developments? You must have interacted to some extent with these institutions.
Well, my knowledge of the details of the things you described is somewhat limited. I can only say it is very good that these new institutions have been created. I just hope that they will be adequately funded as we go along. That is the crucial thing. But I have something else to say, because I have been informally associated with school level education in Bangalore because of contacts and so on. And I see the institutions you describe are for specialized subjects, for sciences at the upper levels, all the or engineering. IITs are the key, the cream of the Indian institutions for 50, 60 years now, since the late 1950s. They were among the leading institutions. The IISCRs were a recognition, result of recognizing something analogous to IITs should have been done for science, and it came half a century later. But both of them are for the cream of Indian students. What bothers me, I am very naive in this matter, for ordinary students, should there not be publicly funded reasonable quality of education after high school? Should there not be something available? You cannot expect everybody to go to a private university. That is a social reality, that this public responsibility, state responsibility for good, reasonable good quality, moderately good quality higher education, not science alone, but all subjects, should it not be provided by the state? If we are progressing wealth wise as a nation, if we are slowly improving our resources in the financial sense, is there not an obligation, just as there should be basic health facilities across the country, should there not be reasonable level of college level education at least spread across the country? One idea which I have, which may be totally unrealistic, it is this, it may not be unrealistic. How many districts do we have in the country? About 700. Can India not afford one reasonable quality undergraduate level college per district in the country, to which students of that region can go if they have the adequate talent, without having to make financial ruin for their families? When we talk of private universities in the country today, many are of very high academic quality. What are the finances involved? Who can afford it? I do not think that as a society we should allow this to happen. I am no economist, I do not know, I am not an educationist in that sense, but this seems to me a real need in the country. I will stop at that. You should say, is it realistic or not?
I think it's a very good point to stop this conversation when such a senior academician who has been involved with various institutions and various initiatives in the country asked this question, and the way he asked this question, the answer is also obvious that we should invest in public education. As you saw that even in the initial part, the emphasis on the universities that he gave, and also the emphasis that on disciplines which are not always very specialized. So I think these are some of the things which we should have brainstorming in the country. Professor Mukunda, really thank you for sharing your views, not just about the initiatives that you are involved with, but the broader issues of education and science education with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity.